Rananine, and welcome to another episode of Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs. I'm your host, Morgan Cobbs. If this is your first time listening to Cobbs Corner, welcome. And to my returning listeners, welcome back. Good morning to those of you with us over here in the South Pacific, um, Australia, Oceania area. Good morning, and to those of you listening back in the States, good evening. Um, Yeah. Again, this is our bi-weekly show where we dive into all things TV, film, and pop culture. So let's just jump right into it. First off, there was a documentary. Oh well, okay. Here, before I get into that, I guess a bit update of me teaching here at Xavier. Um, first quarter's almost up. It's been a fun experience teaching freshmen and been a fun experience. It's been a learning experience. Next week is the first official test for my junior class, the Algebra 2 class. It's coming up Tuesday. So this week will be pretty, pretty busy week for me. The quarter officially ends next Friday. So, this week I'm giving my freshman class computer skills. They have their first official test. We're at the end of our typing unit. And then in Algebra 2, we're at the end of our first chapter. So they have a chapter 1 test, written test on Tuesday. So I will definitely let you guys know how that goes in 2 weeks. And yeah, teaching here at Xavier, it's been a lot of fun. It's been like I know I keep saying like it's been a learning experience, but it really has. And I've been learning how to teach and sort of learning as I go along. And I even told my students how it's been a learning experience, not just teaching. And I'm grateful for this experience. I'm learning so much. So, glad to be out here in the FSM, even if we are a bit not disconnected, but like there's no movie theater out here, so watching movies has been a bit slower out here, and I've had to use all the VPNs to gain access to Netflix and the Disney Plus and to stay informed, essentially. So yeah. So yeah, that's just a brief update on where I'm at teaching wise here at Xavier. And I guess now we can officially get into the content that I wanted to get into. But before I continue, this episode will contain spoilers for Ahsoka episodes 6 and 7, The Continental from the World of John Wick parts 1 and 2, as well as Blue Beetle. So you have been warned. But we will not be starting off with that. We will be starting off with the documentary Ladies First, Story of Women in Hip Hop. This is a Netflix original documentary. I think it's like a 4-part documentary that dives into the history of women in hip hop, particularly Black women who have been disenfranchised and have had to fight for their seat at the table, a table that they themselves built. Yeah. Contains interviews with Rod Digga, Yin Yang, The Brat, um, Chica, Saweetie, Coil Ray, Lotto, and yeah, female MCs from both the past and the present, and examines the music industry and what has changed over time, what has changed, and where the music industry will go in the future, and the vision that we have for the future of hip hop, for the future of the music industry being fair to everyone, essentially, allowing, giving voices to the voiceless, and and it dives into sort of the, I guess, the culture of hip hop, which is a culture of, which is a sort of like swag, I guess, that is unique to the direct, those of us that are the descendants, those of us who are descendants of individuals who survived the institution of slavery in the United States. So foundational Black Americans, which is a term that I've talked, which is a term that I've used on this podcast before. So dove into how hip hop is really the culture. It's the graffiti art, it's the clothing, it's the dancing. It's like a whole way of life, and then music is really, and then rap music is just the music. Music is the last thing that comes with, um, music is the last thing that comes with hip hop. You know, that there's rap music, but then hip hop is the culture, as KRS-One would say. Um, Roxanne Shante and MC Light are also interviewed in the documentary, and shout out to both of them. Just want to give everyone their flowers while I have the opportunity to. There's a movie on Netflix, called Roxanne, which is a movie about Roxanne Shante growing up in Queensbridge projects, and um, her whole struggle. Well, not struggle, but like her experience in the music industry. In making rap music at a young age. I mean, she was, you know, a teenager still, 15, 16 years old, and then having a child at a very young age, and so yeah, and how she was a part of the Juice Crew, which was, and I know I can probably only name like three of the members. Um, Anybody who grew up in that time period, late '80s, early '90s hip hop, feel free to, you know, a Big Daddy Kane and Biz Markie, God rest his soul. Uh, so back then, like it was a difference. I've always said how the rap game was different back then. It was different in like the '80s and '90s, where technology did not give you the luxury of making your own music and just putting it out there on the internet. You see, my generation, we've grown up with SoundCloud rappers, pretty much rappers who become overnight successes on SoundCloud. And so there's more creative freedom today, but I feel like there's not enough rap crews. It's not like it was in the '80s and '90s where you had to know people, you had to leave your house, you had to record your music, and then get those demos out there on cassette tapes. Because the CDs weren't even a thing yet. This is like, late '80s, early '90s cassette tapes, and then getting them into record stores. And you had to know people, you had to know somebody who was in the industry, or know somebody who knew somebody, or have like a cousin who knew somebody. You had to form connections. So there were a lot of like independent artists that were maybe a part of a brand. Like for the East Coast, there was Bad Boy Entertainment, there was Junior Mafia, there was Juice Crew, um, Native Tongues. On the West Coast, there was Death Row Records. You had the Rough Riders. You had down south. You had Goody Mob. There was the Dungeon Family, and so there were more rap crews back then, and that was due to the lack of technology. Modern day technology. They're pre-internet. There was no internet at that time. So technology did not give you the luxury of starting a music career from your basement, you know, and becoming famous overnight because of the internet, because of SoundCloud. That wasn't a thing. Um, my senior year of high school, I was at a Jack and Jill event. I was at the teen conference in, let's see, this was 20, I think this was the 68th teen conference in 2018, and it was in National Harbor, Maryland. Shout out to Jack and Jill. Shout out to the Eastern region. And Roxanne Shante, she had come by and hosted one of the events that we had, one of the I think she hosted the talent show that year. It was hosted by Roxanne Shante and Kango Kid. Kango Kid was another one. Kango Kid, who, if I'm not mistaken, might have passed away 2 years ago. There was Kango Kid and Roxanne Shante. They came by. She shared her story of being in the industry at a young age, and that's actually how I found out about her Netflix movie, Roxanne Roxanne. Uh, then just a few weeks prior to that, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This was maybe March of 2018, and I was at a NSBE conference. Shout out to NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. I was at NSBE 44th National Convention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 2018. And MC Light had hosted our the Golden Torch Awards. I forget what that means. I forget what that stands for, but Torch, something outreach and community help. Um, MC Light had come and hosted the Golden Torch Awards in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was kind of cool. This was the first time. I'm 17 years old at the time. This is the first time that I'm hearing about Roxanne Shante and MC Light. So it's like I had to definitely go and do research. I had to ask my parents, like, who is it? Like, you guys know someone named MC Light, someone named Roxanne Shante? Shout out to both of those queens. But yeah, check out Ladies First. Check out the documentary Ladies First, the story of women in hip hop. And I say also take a look at Hip Hop Evolution. I haven't watched every season. I watched maybe like the first 2 seasons. I'm not sure how many seasons there are now. Yeah, check out these documentaries. It's got some really great stories. And Ahsoka parts 6 and 7. So Ahsoka parts 6 and 7 is like we see Ahsoka and Hu Yang. They're riding inside of a Purgle, space whales, who are able to use hyperspace. They're able to travel through hyperspace. And again, as I mentioned before, spoiler. 3, 2, 1. They're inside a Purgle, and they travel to. They're just inside a Purgle, and then they pretty much just arrive at Peridia, which is because they're looking for Sabine, who went off with Phelan Scroll, played by the late Ray Stevenson. And it's like the more that I watch the show, like the more that I'm reminded that Ray Stevenson is no longer with us, and he's like such a great actor, and I just think that he was underused by the franchises that he was a part of. He was underused in the Thor franchise and Star Wars, and he's just such a great actor. God, I wish he was still with us. But yeah, Sabine had gone off with Phelan Scroll, and they had gone over to Peridia. And they were greeted by the Night Sisters, who 3 witches, which there's a lot of like similarities to Macbeth. Like I was watching a few videos online. It's like it's similar to Macbeth, and there's 3 witches, and I think one represents like birth, and then like motherhood, and like death, and yeah, and how Sabine pretty much escapes from Balin Scroll, who finds Grand Admiral Thrawn. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who, for those of you who remember season 2 of The Mandalorian, the episode where Ahsoka shows up, Rosario Dawson's big screen debut, or I guess Disney Plus debut as the live action version of Ahsoka. For that one episode, she says, like, "Where is Grand Admiral Thrawn?" So now you see Lars Mikkelsen as Grand Admiral Thrawn, who finally, I mean, there's only 8 episodes. We got one episode left. Finally, on like episode 6, finally shows up. More than halfway through the season. So, but Lars Mikkelsen is amazing as Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's a very interesting character because he's the heir to the Empire, and I remember I caught a little bit of him in Star Wars Rebels. Again, I'm in the process of like actually sitting and watching Rebels, and I've also heard some like spoilers from Rebels that he and Ezra Bridger had pretty much escaped at the end of. They pretty much flown off into space with a bunch of Purgles at the end of Rebels, at the end of Rebel season 4, which I do plan on watching myself and like watching in depth, not just going off of, like summaries that I've seen on YouTube. And again, I also again recommend that you guys watch all these shows yourselves. Um, that's kind of a recurring theme on this podcast. But Grand Admiral Thrawn is an interesting villain because he is again the heir to the Empire, and he studies his enemies and studies their tactics and their beliefs, and in order to defeat your enemy, you must know them, uh, which I feel like is a principle from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I think he says something similar to that. You must know your enemy in order to defeat them and know their tactics and all that jazz. So yeah, Grand Admiral Thrawn at the end of this series, and I know there's like a movie coming soon. The Dave Filoni Star Wars movie that's going to talk about like the new Empire, you know, coming soon. So, I mean, who knows where they go with this? But I definitely want to see more of Lars Mikkelsen as Grand Admiral Thrawn, because he is like a like top tier villain in Star Wars, in the comics, in Star Wars Rebels. Even the parts of the comics that I guess have been taken out of the official canon and are now like legends. So, and then he's got like his own like battalion of like troops of like, I guess they're a canonical version of the zombie stormtroopers from Star Wars Legends, which again, Legends not official canon. So his group of stormtroopers are a canon version of the zombie stormtroopers. So not zombie troopers, but we see on Peridia that Sabine, she officially finds Ezra Bridger at the very end of episode 6, which is called Far, Far Away. How perfect, now how poetic, they're literally like paying homage to Star Wars itself. And at the very beginning of that episode, we actually hear Hu Yang, who has been around for like thousands of years training Jedi. He literally, like right before the credits, says like how a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Literally the beginning of every Star Wars movie. So it's really, episode 6 was really just like an ode to Star Wars itself and to us the fans. Sabine finds Ezra, and as Ezra Bridger, who I forget the exact name of the actor, and then they're attacked by a bunch of bandits in episode 7. And Ezra's living with these like peaceful, like little turtle people. I forget their exact like title. Again, Star Wars. Again, true Star Wars nerds, feel free to again correct me and fill in the names in like the comments below. And Sabine offers Ezra her green lightsaber. She offers him a blaster, and he's like, "No, all I need is the Force." And we literally see Ezra just doing hand-to-hand combat and using the Force as a literal weapon. Okay, this was actually some pretty great stuff. I'll admit the Ahsoka series, it's been kind of start and stop. Like the first couple episodes were a bit slow. I liked episode 4. I think at episodes 3 and 4 it started to pick up. 3, 4, 5, and then 6 and 7. We only got one episode left though. That's the crazy thing. It's like after all this, there's one episode left this Wednesday. Well, Wednesday for us because we're a day ahead. of we're a day ahead of the States. So if you live in the States, it'll probably be Tuesday for you, but Wednesday for us. And that'll be the last episode of at least the first season, or I don't know if there's going to be another season of this show. And we're going to start to see the connection between Ahsoka and the Mandalorian. And we're starting to see like the New Republic. We see C3PO shows up. Yeah, yep. C3PO shows up to the council meeting, I guess, where Hera surrenders to the New Republic, and Mon Mothma, Mon Mothma, who has weaved her way through every era of Star Wars, had a scene in Revenge of the Sith that got cut. She shows up in a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith. So prequels to then the original trilogy, that era, the Galactic Civil War. She does show up in Return of the Jedi for that one scene, and then we actually see her in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which takes place before A New Hope, as well as Andor. Andor season 1. So I'm looking forward to Andor season 2, and looking forward to seeing more of Mon Mothma, more of Bail Organa, who was Leia Organa's, who was Princess Leia's adopted father, Bail Organa, who showed up in Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. So my only concern is that they're gonna try and like recast Princess Leia. I'm really hoping that they don't do that, especially after the writer's strike being over, which I'll get to a little bit later in this episode. But Ahsoka, episode 8. Check out episode 6 and 7 if you haven't already. Episode 8 airs this week, this Tuesday. It airs this Tuesday, October the 3rd. And this Friday, nope, this Thursday. This Thursday is Loki season premiere. Season premiere of Loki is Thursday, October 5th. It was going to be October 6th. They brought it up a day, so it is now October 5th. So, Loki season 2, I am doing a Loki movies rewatch. So, all the movies and shows that Loki has appeared in. So, that is Thor, The Avengers, Thor the Dark World, Thor Ragnarok, Avengers Infinity War, and then that one scene in Avengers Endgame, as well as a few episodes of Marvel What If, and then Loki season 1. But yeah. The Continental. Continental is again, spoilers for anybody who has not watched all 4 John Wick movies, anyone who hasn't watched the Continental parts 1 and 2 on Peacock, spoiler warning. All right. Continental, it exists within the John Wick universe. I like how it's capturing sort of the elements of like 1970s New York, and sort of the like Fear City, like mob era of New York City. Fear City, that's literally what they used to call it. There's a documentary on Netflix actually called Fear City, and the opening and the song played during the opening credits is, I think, the song by something Harris, like Baby Harris, Blue Harris, something like that. It's called Hard Times, and that's the song during the opening credits to the Continental as well. So I think that's a nice nod to the 70s era New York and the blaxploitation era as well. In the blaxploitation era, there's 2 Black characters on the show who know martial arts, and so we're seeing a bit of the blaxploitation era, a bit of dive into what relations were like between the Black community and the Asian community, especially post Vietnam War. Especially post Vietnam, and how now this isn't really talked about that much in the show, But during the Vietnam War, how um, FBA soldiers were called soul brother, and Vietnamese people used to tell black soldiers, "It's not your war, it's not your war," uh, and there's even a poster for the fight of the century. Like in part two, we see how there's like fight of the century, which was Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden. I forget the exact year, but it was sometime in the early 70s. And then one of the characters, um, the black guy in the show, whose name I will get in just a second. Continental. He had said how really Muhammad Ali's fight of the century was when he refused. Oh, Miles, played by Hubert Pont du Jour. How really Muhammad Ali's like fight of the century was when he refused to go to Vietnam. When he claimed, you know, trigger warning. I have to use a racial slur. All right, for the purpose of this podcast. When he had claimed that Viet Cong never called me nigger, and so after him saying that and then refusing to go to Vietnam and taking his and they took away his titles, they stripped his titles, they stripped his name, his boxing license. He really took a bullet. You talk about athletes today like Colin Kaepernick using their platform to advocate for racial equality and like racial justice. Muhammad Ali really took a bullet. All right, he had to sell his name, lost his boxing license, had his heavyweight title taken away from him, and he was going to be sentenced to 5 years in prison. But then he took his fight to the Supreme Court, and he was labeled as a conscientious objector. That was his greatest fight. So I like where they're going with this show, a bit of social commentary while also staying true to the spirit of John Wick. This is a John Wick prequel. It's a prequel to the John Wick movies. That we see the New York Continental, and we get a different window into this whole high table society that was established in the John Wick universe. But really, we see how like the John Wick movies, John Wick's 1, 2, 3, and 4, are really movies focused on one person. Again, titular character John Wick. But at least the Continental is able to go places that the John Wick movies couldn't. That you couldn't go with a hour and 40 minute, 2 hours, big screen movie. Going places where they couldn't go on the big screen. So now with the Peacock 3-part limited series, like each episode's about an hour and 20 minutes. So like a 3-part limited series, hour and 20 minutes each, we're able to tell more stories. We're able to grow and expand the universe. I really, really, really like where they're going with this series. I feel like, and Chad Stahelski, when he was asked like if there would be a John Wick 5, he said he needs a 2-year break from the franchise, which, let's be honest, this John Wick franchise has been around for almost a decade. I mean, and Chad Stahelski, him as the director of 1, 2, 3, and 4, really, he's been working on these movies for about a decade, because the first John Wick movie came out 2014. So they were probably in like pre-production and production in 2013, maybe even as early as 2012. So really, he's already been working on this character and building this John Wick universe and this John Wick franchise for a decade, if not longer. So for him to say I need a 2-year break, completely understandable. Yeah. But I do feel like they can do a limited series about the impossible task. Whatever the impossible task was that got John Wick out of the life. I feel like there's a limited series in there somewhere, maybe after the Continental. Because in the Continental, we do see a young version of Winston. We see a young version of Winston who is played by Colin Liddell, and a young version of Sharon played by Ayomide Adegun. I apologize if I butchered that pronunciation. Sharon, who um, who was played by Lance Reddick, in the John Wick's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Lance Reddick, who unfortunately passed away just a week before John Wick 4 came out at the young age of 60. So R.I.P. to Lance Reddick. And I think seeing a young Sharon, we get a deeper dive into his backstory and his involvement with the Continental and his partnership with Winston. So there's only one more episode that's going to air this Friday on Peacock. New parts every Friday on Peacock. I think there's just one part left. It's a 3-part limited series. Parts 1 and 2 are already available. So looking ahead to part 3, it's going to be a grand finale. Now, our next topic, it's in the title. I just gonna have to address the elephant in the room. You know, I mean, we here at Cobbs Corner, we love culture, and we don't just talk about, me personally, I'm branching out into other genres. I know it's been primarily focused on Marvel and DC and Star Wars, and I do plan on to continue to, without revealing too much, I do plan to continue to branch out beyond that. That's where we started, but we are going to branch out into other genres from other movies from other time periods. Um, so Martin Scorsese had pretty much criticized Marvel movies as being essentially, you know, low art and essentially being like not real cinema. And before I say what I gotta say, I just got a disclaimer. Martin Scorsese, okay, he is a very accomplished filmmaker. He is doing amazing for himself. He just had another movie come out this year, The Killers of the Flower Moon, um, which is based on a true story. He's done movies like Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, uh, you know, The Irishman. He's done a lot of great movies, particularly movies with Robert De Niro. So he's someone who is admired and respected in the world of filmmaking and the world of film critiques. He is someone whose art I enjoy. I've enjoyed watching his movies and many of his movies that are so timeless because he's been making movies for like what 50 years at this point. So yeah, I mean, he Wolf of Wall Street's another one. So yeah, he's done a ton of really great movies with a lot of really great actors. The Departed is another one. So I got nothing but respect for him. All right, and I think for him to say that Marvel movies are essentially theme park rides and that they're not actual cinema, I feel like that's a bit of vanity and a bit of like gatekeeping. It's like we have to understand that this whole idea that there's high art, there's like elevated art, and then there's art that's produced for the masses. Like that distinction, I feel like there's overlap, and that distinction doesn't really exist to an extent because if you look at history, if you look at the Shakespearean era, people were saying the exact same thing about Shakespeare, and who's like revered today, who's remembered today for Macbeth or for Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, like, but in his time, he was criticized for his for all of his plays being essentially accessible to the masses, but they contained a bunch of like dirty jokes and a bunch of like innuendos and okay, so I mean, but that was considered low art. But that's not how Shakespeare is remembered today. So I think for and for the rise of like cinema, which is a quote unquote, high art, or you know the kind of cinema that Martin Scorsese is referring to. You look back at history, and that's why I recommend you guys all go watch the movie Babylon, which is a period piece about early Hollywood. Um, watch Babylon on Paramount Plus, because in that movie they talk about the rise of the film industry and how filmmaking, even during the silent era, it was considered a low art. Guys like Chaplin, guys like Charlie Chaplin and the silent films in the 1920s. A lot of it was regarded as low art. A lot of it was regarded as stuff that's mass produced, that there's no thought behind it, there's no substance. So I mean, and that's when the film industry, that's when movies had begun, and when they had continued throughout the 20th century. And the same would, like the new Hollywood that had rose in the 70s and 80s. There was an idea that filmmakers were sort of seeing who could bring new and exciting stuff to the genre, and sort of improving cinema in their own way. And again, it's like there was a time when that was considered low art, when movies were considered, when cinema, movies which were, you know, this new entertainment medium where a working man can pay to see a movie with his wife and three kids and have it all cost pretty much the same as like a gallery seat at the local like theater, at the local, like, that's theatre. So I just worry that Scorsese, you know, is, being that he's older, being that he's sort of a product of a bygone era in Hollywood, and being that today's Marvel movies don't conform to the same kind of cinema that he that he grew up on, or that he sort of lived through, and that he did his best work in, you know, it's like that doesn't automatically devalue the like artist. That doesn't automatically mean that there's no artistic value or entertainment value in these Marvel films that we all know and love. Like, me, um, you know, Comic Boys, Lights, Camera, Rant. We all love these movies and these TV shows. Um, I think just because these movies may not 100% conform to your subjective definition of what real art is and what real cinema is, don't just like pull the rug out from underneath all of us. It's like, I mean, if you don't like the Marvel movies, you can just turn them off. You don't have to watch them. You know, if you don't have to watch these movies, all right. Um, and I think that there's a bit more nuance with these Marvel movies. Like, we actually do learn stuff from it. And let's not forget that. I mean, I always say how superhero movies are not even a genre unto themselves. They're not a monolith. Prime example, Captain America: The Winter Soldier is really a political thriller. Like, yes, it is technically a superhero movie, but it's a political thriller. I guess that would be like the official genre. It's a political thriller that is really kind of basing itself off of a lot of like 1970s political thrillers, like All the President's Men, and you know Wall Street. Movies from that era. And the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, who directed Captain America: The Winter Soldier, they even like admitted that they grew up on movies like The French Connection. They grew up watching The Late Show with their dad, and so really drawing on the movies that they grew up with. Like now they're sort of paying homage, and I feel like every generation kind of does this. So, so I, and again, I say this as someone who actually respects Martin Scorsese, although I do not agree with his comments about Marvel, and I do think that there are some nuance, and that not every movie has to be either the greatest or the worst movie ever. There are some shades of gray, and I mean, I've even heard, I think Wisecrack did a video about Martin Scorsese 2 years ago, and they said that like some of their friends have said how like isn't Martin Scorsese simply just Marvel for Italian Americans? I mean he's made a ton of movies about Italian Americans who love making pasta and murder essentially. Let's not forget that Samuel L. Jackson had like 5 minutes of screen time in Goodfellas, and eventually, boom, gets offed by Joe Pesci. So it's like, yeah, there was the golden era of Hollywood, and there were a lot of great movies, not just from Scorsese, but also from Francis Ford Coppola and from Stanley Kubrick. So yeah, there were a lot of great movies from that golden era, but I also think it's not a whole lot of diversity either. It's not a whole lot of diversity, and not a whole lot of like different kinds of different kinds of movies, different kinds of stories that you, that were told. I think so. So I think there's something to be learned from all movies. There's a bit of truth to all the movies that we watch, those that we like, those that we dislike. There's a bit of truth. There's things that we can learn from all the movies, even the Marvel movies, even the superhero movies, the ones we like, the ones we don't like. There are themes of like even in Guardians of the Galaxy, you see a group of like lonely individuals coming together and uniting behind a common cause. All right. Yes, it contains an anthropomorphic tree. Um, yes, there's a lot of jokes and everything, but like really, at the end of the day, it's a movie about a bunch of a ragtag group of heroes, group of individuals who become heroes. Lonely individuals who all come with their own baggage. They become heroes, and then they come together to they come together to save the galaxy, to save the universe from the threat of destruction, essentially. So, and let's not forget, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 has probably the most emotional ending in all of the MCU. I mean, after Yondu sacrifices herself to save Peter Quill, and then a Ravager space funeral in his honor. So there's something to be learned from all films, all cinema, and that is what I do my best to do with Cobb's Corner is to review these films and extract what are the themes, what are the analyses that we can take back into the real world. You go and you pay money, and he also said how he feels like movie theaters are on their way out, which I also don't agree with. And I think Quentin Tarantino had also said he was on some late night show. He said how movie theaters are here to stay, and how we should maintain movie theaters because it's like you willingly leave your house, you willingly get dressed, leave your house, and pay to go and see a movie in theaters. It's a movie that you saw the trailers, you really wanted to see it, and either just you yourself or you bring friends, invite friends, family, willingly leave your house to go and pay to see this movie and spend 2 hours living in somebody else's world, living in somebody else's reality, living vicariously through these other fictional characters, live in someone else's world for 2 hours. And then once those credits roll, what do you take back into your reality, back into the real world? You know, that is the goal of this podcast. All right, is what do we learn? What do we take back into our reality, back into our world, now that we've experienced someone else's for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours or more. So that is why I will always be a fan of Marvel movies, of cinema as a whole. Uh, and I do believe that there is, again, there's nuance, there's room for middle ground. Um, let's not become so toxic with these fandoms. There's nothing wrong with liking what we like, but the ability to have a respectful conversation where we can, all parties can come together and we can have a dialogue and see where's the overlap, where do we agree, where do we disagree, and again, the ability, I've said this before, agree to disagree, and just move on. So I'm probably going to review some of Scorsese's films in the future, and I'm still a supporter of his, but and no, I do not agree with, and even though I don't agree with his comments about Marvel, but that's all I got to say about that. Just yesterday, I rented Blue Beetle on Google Play. Blue Beetle is now officially available for purchase or rent on Google Play and maybe on your App Store for those of you who have iPhones. It's my understanding that it bombed at the box office, but I liked it as a movie. I think it had a villain whose motivation was sort of like swept under the rug. It's like we don't really get the villain's motivation until the very end of the movie, so it kind of fell flat. But it's a nice like popcorn movie. It's a nice popcorn movie. It's a nice sort of family movie. It's a nice family movie. I think that and I want to see more of Blue Beetle despite its box office failure. I'd like to see more of Blue Beetle um, going forward in James Gunn's DCU. He's already said how Blue Beetle is the first official character in James Gunn's new DCU. He's the first new character, although Superman Legacy, which I think is coming out in 2025, I think, that's going to be the first official movie. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen in the coming years, and then it's all going to make sense eventually, but it might not make sense right now. I think really it's just the fact that we all know that there's going to be a mass like timeline retcon. So it's like, what's the point of even seeing these movies if it's all just going to get reset one day? If it's all just going to get like retconned down the line anyway. So I think again, DC, this DCU, I got faith in James Gunn, especially after movies like The Suicide Squad. During his exile from Marvel, who directed the Suicide Squad for DC. That was his DC extended universe debut. Kind of like how for Marvel, his MCU directorial debut was Guardians of the Galaxy, and then with DC, his directorial debut was The Suicide Squad. Both movies are equally amazing. I think The Suicide Squad is one of the best films in the DC extended universe, in my opinion. And between that and Peacemaker season 1, which again, looking forward to Peacemaker season 2, especially since the writer strike is over now, and so yeah, I definitely want to see more of James Gunn, but DC has just had bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb. Black Adam came out last October, bombed at the box office, as did Shazam: Fury of the Gods, and The Flash, which I didn't even know, I didn't even think there was going to be any trailers for that movie because of the outside controversy with Ezra Miller. Blue Beetle looked like a fun superhero movie, but again, it tanked at the box office. Cautiously optimistic for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. I feel like it's going to be a fun movie because of Jason Momoa, because Jason Momoa is Aquaman essentially. But they had to cut. I think Amber Heard was not even in the trailer. She was in the trailer for like one shot. So I'm curious, what are they going to do about Mira? How are they going to explain like Mira's absence? And again, there's that outside controversy, and again, it's all going to be retconned eventually. So cautiously optimistic about their involvement with of Mira's involvement and the success of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So we'll just have to wait and see. But the numbers never lie. Writer's strike is over, folks. Writer's strike is over. They've come to a tentative deal. I think that this is only the beginning. The writer's strike was only the beginning. Hollywood's back on. We got writers. Saturday Night Live is going to come back. But going forward, there's going to be more conversations about whether or not these studios have the right to use an actor's image and likeness after they have passed away. Whether they're using their image and likeness in CGI while they're still alive or after they passed away. These are the conversations that need to happen now. And these actors, for any actors that are listening to this podcast, they're aspiring actors, you're gonna have to be careful when you sign these contracts. Sign these contracts with these studios, and you pretty much give them the right to use your image and likeness. Be very specific with these contracts. Read every word that's on the page. Even actors like, I think Harrison Ford has already said he doesn't want anybody to take upon the role of Indiana Jones after he dies. And Harrison Ford, he's 80 years old. He's said how he's in the sunset of his career. Not sure if he said anything about folks using his image and likeness, but I'm really hoping that this writer's strike, the SAG-AFTRA WGA writer's strike, historic joint strike for the first time in like 60 years. It's come to a peaceful resolution, thank God. But I think now is the time for more serious conversations about AI and computer graphics and artistic integrity, and whether or not these studios have the right to use somebody's image and likeness after they have transitioned. Those are the conversations. That's next. Writer's strike was just the beginning. Before we end this episode, I just want to do Lights Camera Rant. Shout out to Lights Camera Rant podcast. To Lee, I've been on his podcast. He's been on my podcast. So big shout out to Lee. Congratulations for reaching 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Congratulations, 1,000 subscribers. On to the next milestone. And Cobbs Corner, we will be with you every step of the way. Congratulations to Lee, 1,000 subscribers. Congratulations. And last topic, I've been rewatching Big Time Rush, also on Google Play. So, went to a Big Time Rush concert back in June of last year. I loved it. I've been a Big Time Rush fan since day one. I have their first 2 albums on CD. So yeah, that's just what I've been up to. Hence why I only post every other Sunday, is because the Sunday that I don't post, I'm too busy sitting and binge watching one of the greatest Nickelodeon shows ever. All right, from the era of like teen mix shows that were actually like good. Okay. Dan Schneider controversy aside, iCarly, Zoe 101, Drake and Josh, Victorious, Big Time Rush. Victorious was, I think, the last of like the great teen mix shows. As soon as Victorious went off the air in like 2013, it was all downhill from there. But yeah, then rewatching Big Time Rush. So yeah, that's been it's been exciting, very very exciting. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's edition of Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and follow me on Instagram, follow this podcast on all social media notes. All of those show notes are, uh, all those links are in the show notes below. And let me know, question for this episode. I'll put like a pinned comment. Like if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put a pinned comment. And then for those of you who are listening on Spotify, I will actually post a question. Has Marvel killed cinema? I actually want to hear from you guys. I'll pin comment. I want to know. Has Marvel killed cinema? I want to hear from you guys. You know, how many of you agree with Martin Scorsese? How many of you disagree? So, let's spark that dialogue. And yeah, I've butchered this. I've officially butchered this ending. Tune into Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs every other Sunday, live 8 a.m. Troop Standard Time, right here on YouTube. That is all I got from you guys today. As always, I'll talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.